Gangnam Style.
Hmm.
All right, welcome to the third episode of Kimchi Crime Podcast. I'm one of the hosts, SJ.
And I'm the other host, Walter. Thanks again for joining us. This is our third episode, as SJ mentioned. And this channel will be diving into some of the gruesome crimes that took place in South Korea. We're going to break down the criminal or criminals, as well as the murder crime, everything we're going to try and break down, actually, and touch up upon things that usually aren't covered by the news.
That's right, but we also appreciate your support. Follow us, give us a like, and get your alerts because it's going to be a crazy ride as always. And can we say that we like learning about crime, but we all, of course, always say we don't condone it.
Not at all.
So, Walter, today it's going to be probably, in my opinion, one of the hardest episodes that we're probably going to be covering because as maybe some of our viewers might know by now, we're both parents. And, Walter, for you, you actually been a parent for not too long. We're, a few months now, right? To 3-4 months that have you been a father? How are things so far as a dad?
So yeah, it's obviously been a very tiring experience. My baby's around 6 or 7 months now. She's doing
Jeez,
well
already?
already. I mean, it's just crazy how quickly time flies. And yeah, when we were skimming through our, I guess, case today, it was, one of the harder cases to get through. Once, for any people out there who are parents, obviously, you're more affected by these kind of stories.
Yeah.
Even if you're not a parent, it's still more difficult to hear about these kind of stories than I think other kind of stories. Why do you think that is, SJ? Why do you think when we talk about, we're going to talk obviously about a young girl, a
Right.
very young girl. Why do you think it just hits us more, not just as parents, but as people, when there's a young child involved?
Well, I mean, first of all, children are so vulnerable, right? I mean, they can't defend themselves.
Mm,
They don't have the choice of, running away or trying to defend themselves, or maybe, kind of getting help from adults. They just can't
mm,
talk, and you'll find out today's victim very, very young. And I think all the more difficult for us this week because, again, I mean, the funny thing for our viewers out there, when Walter and I were having our short little meeting about how we're going to go about doing this particular episode, we ended up kind of talking about how many different ways we'll probably get arrested if anyone does harm to our children was pretty much the topic of discussion during our meeting. So, I mean, right now that, I mean, the love we have for our kids is just, I mean, undeniable. It's just on the next level. And so you never want to have see your kid get hurt or anything like that. But at the same time, even if it's another child's kid, it's
mm.
still going to hit that much harder. And I still remember this like it was yesterday, this particular incident. And I remember, both parents and non-parents kind of going out to the streets and paying respect to this personal victim. And again, I can't say enough going into today's episode. This is going to be one of the toughest episodes we're going to be delving into. In my personal opinion, it is one of the most sickening criminal case and as brutal and gruesome as some of the other episodes were. I mean, this one really made me sick in the stomach. And I'm not a violent person, and I've never ever wanted to hurt someone so bad after hearing about this particular case. And these suspects we're going to talk about, they're truly monsters.
They are indeed. I mean, when I heard about the case, it was, yeah, even at that time, because I believe this was back in about 2019, I wasn't a
Yeah.
parent then. You just filled with anger. And as you'll hear later on, the outcome even like exacerbates that anger as well, just makes it a lot worse because it really shows you. And I will criticize the Korean judicial system here.
Yeah.
I think it's far too weak, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
Mhm.
But let's start off with the story, okay? So, you know, we're with my daughter being around, all I see is love. And I can't even imagine like like yelling sometimes. I mean, my daughter isn't at the age where she's that annoying. I mean,
she'll get there. She'll get
she'll get
there.
there. But yes, I mean, a 16 in this case, we're talking about Jeong-In, all right? So a 16-month-year-old girl who was abused and sadly killed by her adoptive parents. Now, I say parent, actually, I mean, because you'll find out later that only one of the parents was actually found guilty of murder, which drives me crazy even thinking about it when you hear the whole story.
Yeah, 16-month. I remember because when this incident took place, my son was something like 19 months old. He was, basically Jeong-In and my son Aaron, they were born on the same year in 2019. And so it hit that much harder. But I want to kind of start off by telling our listeners a bit about Jeong-In before she was adopted by these monsters. Now, a lot of people think her name is Jeong-In, and that's just her separate name, and there is no last name. I found out for the first time while I was doing some research about her that her last name is Chung and her first name is In. But because everyone thought, her name was Jeong-In, maybe a Kim Jong-in or a Lee Jong-in or a Park Jong-in, whatever, they just called her Jeong-In. And that was sort of the name that they went with. And mind you, this is the name that she was given before she was adopted, because what the media and the people are basically going is there's no way that we're going to be calling her by the name that her adoptive parents gave her. Now, this, again, was a name that she was given during foster care. She was born on June 10th, 2019. She would have been, again, the same age as my son. And I remember she was also everything kind of hit personal for me because
Yeah.
she was born, they were giving out all these statistics like she was born 3.4 kilograms. My son was kind of born the same weight and things like that. She was born very, very healthy. Her birth mother just not able to take care of her, and she gave up to a church when she was just 8 months old. Now, she spent just 8 months in a foster home until she was eventually adopted. And according to her foster mom, she was very happy, cheerful baby, loved music, always smiled. And you see a lot of these pictures that were released of her before she was adopted, showing her smiling all the time, such a beautiful child. And we see in the later pictures how her being adopted showed a completely different face. And of course, as we show these pictures, it is, I have to say, it's going to hit you guys very, very hard.
Yeah, I mean, every child is born innocent and like they're just such beautiful creatures. And obviously we'll get more into it, but like every time I think about like how precious my daughter is and how lovely she is, I just don't know the psychology behind people who abuse children. I mean, there is something I could delve into, but it takes too long. But
Right.
like just on a personal level, it's just like, how could you do that to someone so innocent? And anyway, but right. So it's in August of 2019 that Jeong-In was matched with Chang Ha-young and An Song-gun. Now, they have a 4-year-old biological daughter. All right. Now, it's sort of important a bit later into the story why we have to talk about that they have a biological daughter and they decided to adopt. Now, they passed the adoption screening process, which includes a psychological test, and qualifying for adoption is not easy. As a person who is adopted, I know the background of what it takes to be adopted. My parents would tell me what they had to go through, but that was also over 35 years ago. So it makes me question about today's standards of adopting. So
and you would have thought that today's standards would be maybe a little bit stricter, right? Because we can say that maybe many years ago, and this is a problem that Korea had in the past, where everything was a little bit shoddy, right? There was lack of the paperwork being done, and they just never went through all these psychological tests or anything. And you would think today's standards would be a little bit more difficult.
Well, you think obviously we're in a supposedly evolving society, but I have no idea how they pass the psychological test in this situation. But Jeong-In eventually moved into the new home in February 2020. Now, she weighed around 8.5 kilograms. Now, remember this number as it will be a little bit important to the case. Now, SJ, you've got more on this, right?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about the adopted parents because if you just only hear about their background, you would not think that there are any signs that they would be monsters. And I think that's sort of one of the reasons for how they were able to pass the adoption screening process in the first place, because you have the adopted mom, Chang Ha-young, born in November 4th, 1986. She's my age. Her husband, An Sung-gun, born June 18th, 1984. Now, so the thing is, I believe they knew each other because they attended the same university at Handong Global University, and they were both very much religious. Now, I want to make it clear here that we're not here to bash on any specific religious group or anything like that, and the fact that always Christians are bad people because these two people were Christians. I'm only going to cite the facts here because the fact is Chang is a child of a pastor. Now, her mom owns a daycare center, which is going to be ridiculous. That's run by her husband's church. Now, An, the husband, worked as in past tense because he was fired afterwards. He was working at a radio station dedicated to the Christian belief. I think maybe some of our Korean viewers or listeners might know which specific channel that might be. And his father was also a pastor. Now, we used to call them back in the US PKs, pastor's kids. And so, usually, I mean, they turn out all right. Some others, not so much. But really, the background here is the fact that they're very, very religious.
So that's also a reason why they probably may have passed this adoptive process so easily, is because their background almost ideally suits the situation, right? Like if we just take away the absolute evilness out of this context, and yes, I mean, like if one's a pastor, you would assume that they come from a very strict or very well-mannered background, and if someone's parents own a daycare center, of course you would think, well, that's perfect. I mean, like we're putting this child into a perfect home, but I have no idea where, and it's something I'd love to look into more, what the relationship between the parents and their parents.
Oh, it's good relationship. There was nothing sour that went wrong. And I believe, and we're not really going to touch deep into this, but I believe when this incident popped up and they tried to interview the parents, they were saying they were surprised themselves. I mean, there was no signs that they were this evil. And so it really didn't look like their parents had any bad relations with these two adoptive parents.
That does scare me a little bit. Like when even maybe you're trying to be a good parent, but you can still breed something that is so evil. It's very scary. But so you can tell that they're really religious, as we talked about. They come from this background, and they honestly just don't come off as the abusive sort of people. But we're going to find out, obviously. We're here. This is the reason why we're here, that this is not true. And this is why where the story might make some very uncomfortable, okay? Because I will be getting into details of how Jeong-In lived through these times with the adoptive parents. Now, in the 8 months that Jeong-In lives with them, now she's given a new name, and it's An Yul-ha. Now, she was systematically abused. She was tortured in many, many brutal ways. And as a result of her constant abuse, she would have, multiple bone fractures. Remember, this is still a very young baby.
Yeah.
Their parents wouldn't feed her, so she'd be starved. And this is a statement that made my blood boil, right? And it's going to make everyone else's blood boil as well. And the reason why they decided not to feed her was they didn't like the smell of her feces. Obviously, when they had to change. Like, they have another child. They should be used to it. But
look, here's the thing. You have a kid, right? And Walter, I'm sure you've done a great deal of changing of the diapers for your daughter. And say what you want, but if it's your kid, man, that poo smells like flowers.
It
It
does.
smells like flowers if that's your own kid. Now, granted, she was adopted and so forth, but if you have adopted it, you put it into a place, that's your child now. You have the responsibility. And I don't care. Maybe it might not smell like flowers, but
Mm,
it certainly doesn't smell bad, especially if you're a very young child. So, yeah.
exactly. It's just it's blood boiling, to be honest with you. It's just, to be honest with you, I don't know. Like, it sounds too strange to be true, but given the fact that these people are absolutely insane,
Yeah.
I guess it might have actually been a legitimate reason why they didn't want to do it. But, and like, here's the thing as well, right? The day she's were fed, like, she was, they wouldn't feed her often, but the days that she was fed, she was given blistering hot food from the microwave, therefore causing, her to burn her mouth. And then I mean, she's a child. Obviously, you have to take care of the
It's
temperature. They're
torture.
very
It's
sensitive. It's
torture.
torture. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's absolutely insane. So her adoptive parents would leave her at home 3 hours a day, which obviously you shouldn't leave any kid home for that lot. You shouldn't even leave them for like a minute or two, really. But this was during that 2 month period that she was absent from daycare. Now, in Korea, we sometimes put our children into daycare very early,
Hmm.
obviously because either we work or some other reasons. But she actually was absent for about 2 months, so that's also important for a bit later.
Yeah.
Now she was locked in a dark room every day around after about 7 p.m. Now, Jung Aunt used to slap her and tore out her mouth when she would cry. I don't know what they were thinking, that like slapping some very young child would make them cry less, but they would
Yeah.
deliberately, they would also do demeaning things, like they would deliberately trip her while she was walking. I mean, this is just a few of a long list of abuses that Jeong-In faced.
Yeah, so that 2 month that she was absent from daycare, it's kind of important because it's because of the abuses that she went through and the parents not wanting to get caught. Remember, she's faced broken bones as well, and because they didn't want any red flags from the daycare, they just kind of didn't send her. Instead, what they did was leave her alone in the
Mm,
house, an injured kid. But the problem with all this, surely with all these abuses, right? Like someone might have noticed something weird because she went to daycare center while her daycare teachers saw unusual bruises on her face and ears. And teachers are basically well trained to find all this stuff. I remember, my kid's like he's older now. He's like 4 or 5 now, and so he doesn't, fall down or he doesn't trip anymore. But I remember when he was, because he started walking very at a very young age. At 9 months, he started walking, and so by the time it was like 9 months and 2 days, he started
mm,
running around, and so because he wasn't a very good runner at obviously
mhm,
at that right age, like he would trip and he'll fall. He'll have bruises all over the place, and he'll get like we'll get messages from our daycare center. Hey, so we found some bruises on Aaron's legs, so we're just kind of
mm,
wondering if everything is okay. Oh yeah, I mean you probably noticed at daycare he runs a lot and he falls down a
mm.
lot, and so that was that, right? So even
Yeah.
with us, who I would we have never gotten anything close to trying to abuse our kid. We get
Mm,
questions from the daycare center. But the thing is, her bruises, these
mm.
injuries on her faces and his ears, I mean, these were legit. And so they found that she was injured in multiple occasions. They suspected child abuse. They reported to the police on May 25th, 2020. Now, when the police and the Child Protection Institution investigated into the case, they closed the case saying there was no apparent abuse found. Are you freaking kidding me? They found no
Yeah.
apparent abuse found in this. They could have surely saved her life then and there.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
nope, no abuse there.
Mm. It's just, I've got a lot to say about like the police system here. Like I've got a friend who's a police officer, and I'm hoping he's a good one. But I'll get into it a bit later. How it really annoys me. Some, like, you will probably hear as we go on through our episodes that there'd be many times where police have failed to do their job and therefore the
Yeah.
victim has died. It's not an uncommon thing here for some reason, and it's just terrible. But obviously this case doesn't stop here. On June 29th, 2020, a family friend of Jeong-In, left alone in the car for over an hour on a hot summer day. And I mean,
You know how
Korea
hot it is. Come on now.
Korea is, let's say, it's not like a dry strong heat. It's just very humid, but it
Yeah.
just fills up that car so quickly. I mean, even with the aircon on, like blasted full, up to full, it's still quite warm in the car. So, again, this is reported to the police. Now, the police investigation was not initiated until 1 month later. So all the CCTV footage that is extremely important to the situation from the street, it's all been erased, and so the police had nothing to go off. So it was closed again. And this is the second time they could have saved her life. I mean, like I said, Korean authorities, they really have a bad reputation of constantly being late to something, unorganized investigations. Like when we talked last time about our last case,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, Yoon Cho. I mean, they made mistakes and they were late to many situations. They couldn't put two and two together. I really hope these days they're getting better training, because it's not acceptable what they're doing these days. But after a 2 month absence from daycare from July 2020 to September 2020, she eventually returned to daycare, and the teachers were shocked to see how bad of a condition she was in. Right, she lost a significant amount of weight, and as you know, kids should be getting a little bit, chubby towards around
Yeah.
that age, or at
Yeah.
least looking healthy. And there were bruises all over her body. Now, they did the right thing at the start. They took her to a pediatrician, the teachers, by the way,
Yeah.
where they examined her and reported her to the police again, saying that she's suffering from malnutrition and what clearly is child abuse. Now, the pediatrician strongly advised to the police that she be immediately separated from her parents. Now, this is from a pediatrician.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what happens? Again, the police and child protection institution decide to take her to another clinic, which I don't understand, where, get this. Now, I don't know if this was just by fate, but the adoptive parents had a close relationship with this pediatrician who diagnoses her, and they diagnose her with a mouth infection. What? Like, a mouth infection doesn't
Goodness.
explain the bruises. It doesn't explain the malnutrition. It doesn't explain. I'm not a doctor, but I hell know that a mouth infection doesn't explain that kind of thing. I mean, oh, it's just so stressful to hear this, SJ.
Yeah, they wanted second opinions was what it was. They say, you know what, the adopted parents ended up coming out saying that, you know what, we don't trust this pediatrician who said she's suffering from malnutrition and child abuse. And who is this person to say they strongly advised to the police that our child be separated from us? I don't believe this person. We have a pediatrician that we know and we've trusted for many, many years. We want to get a second opinion. And surely they must have a really good relationship, because that sounds redunculous.
It is.
I
like
honestly, I
think
don't know why. I don't know why they didn't start investigating into this particular pediatrician as well, because this moron should obviously lose their job, or kind of assisted in this whole thing, because this is the third time that they could have rescued this girl, right? The third time.
I just find it really strange that it's the third time. And I'm sure they were probably maybe living in the same area. Why didn't they look at three different reports and go, there's something got to be up? Like, the fact that 3 times people have talked about Jeong-In as being abused, and the police, like, yeah, here's the thing. The police should have got a third opinion, in my opinion. They should have got a third opinion. If they didn't trust the first one and the second one are conflicting, obviously you need a third opinion. You can't just go off the last person
But that's
you hear.
more work, Walter, and that's the problem. That's the problem with these people. That's more work, and so they've already done an extra work by getting a second opinion. Why do more work by going into third opinion on this? Again, it's one of the two. Okay, the adoptive parents are just extremely lucky that they got away with this 3 freaking times,
Yeah.
or the fact that, I mean, there's clearly a problem with the judicial system here. There's clearly a problem with the police. There's clearly a problem with the adoption agency, because they had a ton of evidence that something was wrong and they did nothing with this. Now, this is going to be the last time we're going to hear about Jeong-In, because just 20 days after the third case was closed, this whole incident with her being taken to a second opinion pediatrician, Jeong-In dies. October 12th, 2020, Jeong-In is sent to daycare. Again, clearly in terrible condition. Now, there was a CCTV footage of Jeong-In, what really is the last footage they have of her alive. And I've seen this multiple times, and it's Walter, we've seen some of the most gruesome crime scenes. We've seen footages, but this to me was the most heartbreaking thing I've ever seen in my life. And so we're going to share this CCTV footage in our daycare. And it's another clear warning to all of our listeners out there. It is going to be very, very difficult to watch, but you can see that Jeong-In, in the comfort of her teacher, just not being able to move. Now, mind you, with all the things that happen, the teachers did all they can. It really is not their fault, the teachers. They've alerted the police. They've done everything that they can, but they just weren't able to do anything. This image of Jeong-In kind of wrapped around her teacher is just haunting. And later that day, her adoptive father ends up picking her up. So the teacher obviously says, listen, there's something really wrong with Jeong-In. And this freaking, oh God.
Words can't explain it.
Forces Jeong-In to walk to show that she's okay. Okay. The teacher tells him, listen, you got to take her to the hospital. Does he? No, he does not. No. Following day, October 13th, 2020, she would be absent from her daycare. Chang, the adoptive mother, takes a cab to the hospital. Now, the cab driver testifies that he saw how blue Jeong-In was turning and that she was unconscious. Now, mind you, if you have a child, man, my kid once like bumped his head and had a cut in his forehead, and we started panicking and went to the emergency room over that when he was a kid. Now, the cab driver was saying she did not even look panicked. Ended up going to the ER. She had several rounds of cardiac arrest. And unfortunately, at the age of 16 months, she died. Now, while Jeong-In was fighting for her life in the emergency room, what does her adoptive mother do? She's going online shopping. She's going, what can I buy on the internet? And then she realized as she was going to the hospital that there was some fish cakes that she saw being sold outside the hospital. She goes outside the hospital looking for some fish cake to buy. She's clearly not concerned with the well-being of Jeong-In.
It's just absolutely unbelievable. And like, you just don't realize how evil some people are. I mean, this is by far the worst, I would say the worst child abuse cases that South Korea has ever seen, which we'll actually talk about in a minute. Now, obviously, this has been enough evidence, finally, after someone has died, a pure, innocent child, that someone has died. Finally, the parents are now, arrested, all right? And they have a trial. Now, during the trial, the autopsy was revealed and the doctor testified that Jeong-In's case is the worst child abuse case he's ever seen in his 20-year career. He said he's examined 3,800 bodies, possibly more, and this one was by far the worst. Now,
that says a lot.
It does says a lot. And especially to, again, we can't say it enough, a young, innocent girl. So the forensic doctor had never seen a ruptured pancreas in a pediatric case and concluded that Jeong-In was probably stomped on multiple times on her stomach by adults. Only extreme force applied to such a child would cause this sort of rupture in her internal organs. Now, Doctors also believe, according to her autopsy reports, that she received severe beatings 3 to 5 days prior to her death. I mean, like, it's just thinking about it is just really hard. In the last days of her life, the pain she felt, like, you can't even imagine. Even as adults, we have a higher tolerance to pain, and
Yeah.
like, I can't even begin to sympathize or imagine what she went through. Like, breathing was even painful, and you could see why Jeong-In was not crying in the CCTV footage when she was last seen alive, actually. But like, official cause of death was amputation of her pancreas and traumatic damage to her internal organs, including severe intestinal rupture caused by heavy external forces. Basically, we were just saying, she was just absolutely beaten to death.
The fact that, I mean, you have to understand all of this. She was already kind of very much hurt for probably weeks, and the fact that she still received a beating days before her death is just unbelievable because, like you said, Walter, I mean, you would not even do something like this to adults.
Yeah.
You would not even wish this on some of your worst enemies. And for them to do something like this to a 16-month-old child is really just it's unimaginable. But here we are talking about this. If this doesn't make you guys mad, wait for this, because on May 14th, 2021, her adoptive mother, Chang Ah-young, she was finally charged with murder and child abuse, given a life sentence. But I'm going to put an asterisk on that. The husband and the adoptive father, An Sung-gun, was given just 5 years imprisonment for child abuse and neglect because he claims that he was unaware of the abusive acts of his wife, unaware that this was all happening. I mean, do you guys live in a separate house? Like, come on now. You've even picked up your child, Jeong-In, and you saw something wrong with this. He refused to take her to the hospital. You were involved in this, okay? Now, if that's not maddening enough, November 26, 2021, Chang, the adoptive mother, who once again initially received a life sentence, her sentence gets commuted to 35 years in prison. Both the adoptive parents' appeals, even with this, still saying that it's too long, while the prosecution obviously says it's too little. April 28th, 2022, an appeals trial was held, and the Supreme Court upheld the 35-year and 5-year sentences. But this, unbelievable. And by the way, they did some like investigation into like what the mom is doing. She still says she's innocent, and she's preaching the word of the gospel in prison right now, and basically saying, this is the kind of person I am, and I am innocent, and look at them putting me behind bars. 35 years is not enough. It's not enough.
Life sentence is not enough, to be honest with you. And like, I think death penalty is too good for them. Like,
oh, absolutely. You know what happens to people in prison, like in the United States, if there's any child abuse or sexual harassment of, raping of a child, they get shanked, they get killed in prison.
Yeah. Well, they definitely get the worst. They know what they're called chomos or something, like child molesters. And I think that like anyone who hurts a child just deserves a like 1 meter by 1 meter square space where they just have to sit in that room that's dark and just hate their life because like, and I'm obviously the parents I'm extremely mad at, but the judicial system was supposed to be a country that's evolving, that's, changing the ways of, how we trial people. But a 5 year sentence on possibly the fact that he's a person says, oh, I didn't know about it, when there were reports like you mentioned. A 5 year sentence. This is why the Korean judicial system doesn't scare me. If, like we said at the start of the show, if someone happened to hurt one of our children, I'd gladly go after that person and hurt them to a point where they could barely live. And I wouldn't care about going to jail because I know the judicial system is just so weak here that it doesn't scare me that I've been in prison
No,
for 5 years.
no.
It's just insane. I mean, Korea, we're a beautiful country. We have beautiful people. We're still, even though we report on these dangerous things, have a very, very safe roads to go on. Technology is fantastic, but we are so behind when it comes to law.
Well, the thing is,
So behind.
the ironic thing with Korea is the fact that some decades ago, we had very, very strict judicial system in place. Now, remind you, in the 80s, for instance, this country was run by a military dictator. And
Mm,
so it's only recent that South Korea was able to achieve democracy. And so what it was is that because there were many decades from like the late 50s to all the way until the 80s that there was not a whole the law was just way too strict, that they realized, listen, we need to suppress the people less. Now there's a difference between giving the right judgment on a legal on a criminal case and just kind of flinging the punishment and giving them minimal sentence here, because it's gotten way too loose. And the whole idea was this is the fact that Koreans were too suppressed for many years, that they're going to go easy on the punishment, and that's not the way it's supposed to go. It
mm.
really is not. And so that's kind of the historical background as to why we see just poor punishments and just so little. And again, we technically have the death penalty. It's never been imposed for quite a while now. And so the whole idea is to suppress the people less. But I think we can all agree, some people should be maybe executed. I mean, this could be a controversial thing. I know there are some people who are for and against execution and death penalty and things like that. But like you were saying, these parents, even the death penalty is an easy escape for them. It's an
Yeah, I
easy
think so.
escape for them.
I think that's what I think in the way, I'm neither for or against. I'm still on the fence about the death penalty, but
Yeah.
it's something that I think it is the easiest way out, to be honest with you. I mean, you don't have to deal with any suffering yourself after you're gone. So I think it's just far too easy for them. And I don't think certain people should, because I feel like they should spend each day of their life just not being able to have the freedom that normal citizens do. Now, this case was obviously massive here in
Yeah.
South Korea, and we'll finish it off here. But like South Korea, it was all over the news. Everyone was shocked to hear the amount of abuse that this baby took. A lot of people came together to protest for better child protection laws, while also remembering Jeong-In. Like there was like a celebration of, sadly, she had a bad life towards the end, but the celebration of her. But there were a couple of sickening revelations that came out later, which is why the two had decided to adopt Jeong-In. Now, it's a little bit off topic, but it has to apply to this case.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
here in Korea, we have an apartment lottery system. Okay, so you put in a certain amount of money every month, and it gets credited later on. And you also get more points if you owned a home for a long time. And since we've got a very low birth rate at the moment, so they're
Yeah.
trying everything they can. So you get actually more points if you have a larger family. So the investigators were actually saying that the reason why Jeong-In was adopted in the first place was to get more points for this apartment lottery system. And once they were able to get the apartment, she was no use to them at all. So they were basically using an innocent
Yeah.
soul to get a larger apartment, a nicer apartment. I mean, can you just it's just just thinking
there's
about it.
there's so many things wrong with the Korean society, and you know what, for our viewers out there, we might sound like we're bashing on Korea. We love Korea. We live here.
Yeah.
We've lived here for a very, very long time. We have family here, and
Mm,
there's so many great things about this particular country, but there's also flaws, just like every other country. And this country, there's something about apartments and real estate and owning a home that drives them insane, and they'll do anything to get this. Right now, Korea has a record number of household debt because they borrowed money that they don't have
Mm,
into buying apartments. And mind you, it's not to buy a home and say, I'm going to call it home for many, many years. Like I bought a home and it's not a very good investment. It doesn't have a very good investment value, but it's big. It's in a good location. And I plan to live here for a very, very long time. Others are saying, well, it's not a very good investment because you're not going to be able to flip it. A lot of
mm,
Koreans, because they're saying, no matter how hard they work, they can't make the amount of money to buy a home. What they do is they start flipping homes and things like that, and having a new apartment, a newly built apartment, automatically gives you more money than what you pay for. And so
mm.
they're willing to do all sorts of things. But I think we can all agree that if this is true, I I mean, calling him even a monster is an understatement here. And and we're kind of coming to a close with this, but it is just ridiculous how greed of some people can lead them to kind of going on and performing these kind of actions to a child. And so I'm not sure if even with this case, it's actually changed much because, Walter, as you know, over the past couple of years now, there's been some child abuse cases that popped up, and we're still unable to stop this from happening.
Exactly. And I mean, the fact that you're using a child to get an apartment in the first place is pretty sick. Like, and
Yeah.
even even let's say the abuse wasn't there, you'd go, that's insane. You adopted a child just to get an apartment. But the fact is, obviously, she was uh basically just this thing, or to them, they didn't see this as a child. They saw this
No.
as a point on top of their lottery system. Like it's I insane. I would like to know the psychological tests that they have on them now, because it's absolutely atrocious. Like even like it's never forgivable no matter what happens to a child if you abuse them. But like you kind of would assume that the background of the, let's say, murderer or the offender or the suspect had maybe a very terrible past, like he was abused or she was abused, and
They weren't,
therefore
though. That's the thing. They
that's the
weren't.
thing.
They
That's
weren't.
the thing. Like, I don't get where that evilness came from. I mean, it's sort of ironic that like they are so religious and they've done probably the most evil thing you could ever do
But
to
there's
a
so many people out there, Walter, that hide their evil in the
yeah.
name of religion, right? For some reason, if you say, I practice this religion, then I'm supposed to be a very a saint, basically, and that I should be
Mm,
forgiven for all the things that I'm doing, which is obviously not the case here.
yeah.
And again, I mean, I keep it was hard writing this story up. It was hard throughout, the whole time that we're talking about this because of how vulnerable children are. And just the fact that Jeong-In did not have a choice, right? It was not her choice to be brought to this world. It was not her choice to be sent to a foster home. It was not her choice to be adopted by these monsters. It was not her choice to be killed by these parents. And so it's just that we're going to probably talk about many, many horrendous criminal cases and murders, but I have a feeling this is probably going to be one of the hardest episodes for us, and it's just it is what it is because of
Yeah.
just how young this victim was.
Yeah, so obviously, like the case is coming up. There's obviously no real entertainment and real crime, but when it comes to like the one that hits home or the one that makes you upset more than angry, the one that like makes you feel like heartbroken because something like this happens, this is the sort of case that is one of those. It's not one of the ones that we did previously where
No,
it's just on a different level of sadness. But we'll have to wrap it up there. It's been a hard ride for this episode. Tell us what you think in the comments section. Please leave any comments. We'd love to get feedback from you. Always remember to like and subscribe, and SJ, we'll see them next week, right?
All right. We'll see you next time.